Hello, and welcome to the sixth episode of Synthesized Sunsets. We are here with Ari Schwartz, who is an experimental musician and composer who has a lot of things to tell us about the media landscape. So, Ari, you consider yourself a postmodernist. How do you think that the Romantic movement has affected the course of art history and led to the development of postmodernism?
Okay, so to me at least, there's something very similar about the literal thing that's happening with postmodernism and the literal thing that's happening with romanticism, even though the meaning behind them are very different. Like postmodernism, it's all about camp. It is about shitposting. It's about just being a little bit fucked up, but in a way that resembles like what romanticism was without any of the meaning and just kind of like taking that and saying like, oh, that was like a really cool, beautiful thing you did, but actually it's stupid. Art is stupid. You're stupid. I'm stupid. And so, to me at least, I think the tools are really similar. Like we did have to go through modernism to get from just straight up romanticism, which I think is like a pretty palatable art form, to like the most unpalatable to like palatable again, but in an ironic way. I guess all of this is just saying like to me, they're very related. They're both fun, and they're fun for different reasons.
Do you think it's like now kind of difficult to present romantic art as straight up romantic art because we've gone through this other thing that leads people to interpret something as ironic by default?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the space that you're in, because in some spaces you'll just get shit from like high artists or whatever about being like, why are you presenting like neo-romanticism, neoclassicism or whatever? Like, why aren't you doing something new? But in other ways, I think you were talking more about like you present something romantic in the form of like a video online and everyone on social media is like, haha, tell me this is satire, right?
Well, I guess I was more going for the idea that whenever you watch a movie, for example, there's kind of always got to be this like hidden meaning or like subversive message now. Whereas like
Mm.
perhaps one of the most subversive things you can do is just make a movie with no deeper meaning. It kind of just is. I think in the past you could just do that and that was kind of the default. But nowadays when you do that, I think people on the internet will still try to analyze it as if it's not just like a straight up romantic art piece without any deeper meaning, even if it is.
Yeah, I see what you mean. In some ways, I don't really care what the artist's intention was, because if people get their own meaning out of it, they get their own meaning out of it. I guess you could say like, whoops, you missed with this one, but communication is a two-way street, and I think that any action that's like creation and then communication and then reception is always going to have that like risk, I guess, of being misunderstood, and I think that's why we have art, because if everything was like perfectly understood, then to me it's not really interesting anymore.
Do you think that there's a way to convey to an audience in the modern context, like, no, really, this is actually completely sincere and serious?
I think somebody could do that. I think if you asked me to do that, I would struggle. There's probably a way, and obviously you can't just say that straight up,
Well, that
right?
almost seems like it would have the opposite effect.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
say
what I
that
was
straight up
gonna say.
really seems ineffective.
Like there's things, I think there's ways you can do it that rely heavily on like cultural knowledge or like things that people kind of grow up associating with a specific thing. Like I think you're more likely to run into the idea of seriousness if you have a film about like the death of a child as opposed to like a walking banana. So there's at least a spectrum there. I don't know if you can really ever get to 100% in either direction, but like maybe.
In some ways, our culture is kind of bifurcated, where you have a lot of people who are irony poisoned, for lack of a better word, but there's also a pretty big swath of the mass media audience that does long for simpler narratives, I think. I know that one unexpected movie success was Top Gun Maverick. Probably fair to say that Top Gun Maverick doesn't have incredibly deep themes. I mean, you could obviously read it as military propaganda, but I feel like it's a movie that is not really meant to be analyzed. It's kind of more to be meant to be experienced simply. And I think that it really showed the size of this market. You know, people who aren't really craving the next big thing in metamodernism, but are really just like, yeah, I just want to like go to a movie, turn my brain off, and have a good time. Pew pew.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot to be said for the escapism of it all, especially when like people are feeling like they want to escape from something, which, not to be political, but just like given the state of like online arguing today, I would say that there's a good deal of escapism that would be appreciated. And hell yeah, Top Gun, you know? I think so. I think there's also like this makes me think of the way they make a lot of modern kids TV now, where they are aware that an adult is going to watch it. So they try to make it, not 3,000,000% annoying, but like they have one layer of structure or narrative or something for children, and then they have another layer under that for parents who don't want to watch Blue's Clues, for 4 hours without a little bit of like an in joke or something.
Blue's Clues was so fire.
Yeah. Good show.
Agree.
Good show. Question for both of you guys. When was the last time you watched or read something where you were like, that was not very deep, but it was just pretty good?
Honestly, Top Gun Maverick was a good example of that for me. Like, I did like that movie quite a bit. And I do feel like I find myself in like both of those audiences depending on the mood. Like, sometimes I want to just see the art and have it consumed with no thought from me. And then sometimes I want to like interact with the art, have the art require me to like think about stuff and then like, look back on it and maybe have a conversation with someone about it. But sometimes that's just like a lot of work.
Yeah, I agree. I have one brain cell and it's working overtime, and like we can't be doing that all the time. I recently went to the Broad, which is an art museum in downtown LA. One thing that I definitely remember from there that I think, at least to me, didn't really have any deeper meaning was like there's this room with just like a really big table and really big chairs. Proportionally, like you were interactive media, and that's the direction kind of my music has been going. Because I like when people feel a sense of control. Like that's a very specific kind of emotion that I am really interested in evoking. Since I've been going down that path and like developing a lot of things that are more like, let's all come together, let's have a collective experience, you can control the things that I'm doing, I'm also starting to see the value of a hostage situation in the other way, where it's like you're gonna sit here and I'm gonna make art at you and you just have to be there for that. And it's not my style at all, but I think it's really it's differently powerful and very funny. But the answer to your question is yes.
Mm-hmm. How do you try to provide that sense of control for your audience?
You give them something to do. I mean, that's a really stupid answer, but it's like you give them something to do that like meaningfully affects the thing that's being created. And part of that too is like, when do you feel in control in your own life? Because I don't, like, most of the time. I'm just rolling through these things, but like, it's a massive cope when something like horrible happens and you're like, at least I can choose my music on the ride home, or like I can like decide what I'm eating tonight. Philosophy aside though, when it comes to like concrete things, at least for music, it's like, I'm gonna give you this controller and you can like play around with it and like tilt it or like shake it or whatever. I work with a lot of motion controls, and like when you shake it, you'll hear something in the music that goes like, and so just creating a really explicit and direct link between something someone is doing and the outcome of the entire experience, I think contributes to a sense of control.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen anyone do anything really crazy with their newfound sense of control?
I think it's good to playtest things because there's always a contingent of people that will immediately try to break your shit. I'm one of those people too, so I really appreciate it and it's good. But like you have to be like so locked in and so like tight with the engineering, I guess, because when I do these kinds of things that are like maybe closer to installations than performances, there's usually like a couple phases. And I would say that like on average most audiences go through this thing of like, first they're like exploring the medium and like figuring out what all the things they can do are, and then they try to like push it to the maximum, and that's when people start trying to break shit, and that's when like people are like running around and like really like all over the place. And then after they get that out of their system, there's like a sense of like trying to create something controlled and like I guess meaningful to them.
Do you think that you're mostly just trying to instill like a neutral sense of control generally, or are you trying to maybe instill a certain kind of feeling of control, perhaps for good or for evil?
Okay. I think there's not going to be a general answer to that, but the answer is going to be like there's still a message and there's still something I want to accomplish with the art, even though it's in an interesting medium. A big thing is making sure the technology is not the message; it's a way to convey the message. It could be good, it could be evil, it could be a lot of things. It just depends what the art piece is about. And so I'll give you one example, which is I did this thing. It was basically an Arduino photo sensor circuit that detects like ambient brightness in the room. That brightness basically is like a sliding spectrum that changes the music from like a dark sounding version to a light sounding version. And what I would do is I would say like, okay, you're the audience. You have to work together using your phone flashlights to change the room from all the way bright to like all the way dark. And doing that was like a metaphor for collective action in the sense that like if one person is turning on their phone flashlight, it's not going to do anything and the sensor is not going to pick that up at all. But like you have enough people going and you have this movement that snowballs and you can hear tangible change through the music. And so like that was an example of like, I guess you would say the control is like symbolic of a good thing, although collective action can really mean anything, and you could have collective like riots and like destructive activity. I don't know. It's in that case, it was about a specific thing, but didn't really have any ethical baggage to me.
Do you have any opinions on Geidi Primes, the debut album of Grimes? It's like the Dune one. There's like a concept album for Dune, and it's named after the Harkonnen homeworld, Geidi Prime. You know, when I remember there was like a bit ago where when I was watching the Dune movie, Dune Part 2, I was like, oh snap, Grimes must have gotten her name by combining Geidi and Primes. That's crazy. But that's not true. She just thought she was just looking at a list of music genres.
Be crazy.
But really, what happened is she was just looking at a list of music genres. She didn't know what grime was. She's like, Grimes. That's kind of cool. And I was like, damn it. My version was cooler.
That's so funny. Your version is so cool. I'm gonna start telling people that I'm not above lying for the bit.
We are spreading misinformation here on the podcast.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that's so speculative. Fiction.
Yes. Speculative truth.
Is a lie speculative fiction? I guess you don't want someone to speculate if you're lying to them.
Yeah, I think baked into speculative fiction is the knowledge that it is speculative. This is kind of out there, but if you were to like completely accurately predict some event 3 years in the future to the littlest detail, would it cease to be speculative fiction once that event has transpired?
I guess if it's literally a perfect prediction.
It's literally a perfect prediction that was written without the knowledge that it would happen. But then like it did happen. Does it start being history once it happens? Or does it stay speculative fiction because of the context in which it was written?
I think you would still view it as a speculative fiction book. But reading the book would just be like reading a history book or something. I don't know. Maybe the person would be like a speculative fiction author and the book they wrote is like a history book. You're
kind of like a artist doesn't matter maximalist, right? So in that case, it's literally the same.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm that maximalist though. Yeah. I still find that interesting though. I still care to some extent. But I guess from a certain perspective, if it's identical to a history book and you're literally just going to be reading it, I mean, it's not actually different in that case.
Yeah, it's the same text.
I don't know if this is a case. Another hypothetical, I guess, is what if you have someone who's just like doesn't believe they're speculating at all, but they're like, I don't know, maybe they're like schizophrenic and are having like vivid visions of the future and are just like recording these visions. Do you think that's speculative fiction?
Like if they're trying to pass it off as fact?
The artist believes it is fact. They're just writing down their true experience of the world. To anyone else looking at it, it looks like a piece of speculative fiction. It's kind of like the backwards case.
I guess I would say that it's not, mostly because, well, I mean, I'm not as much of a artist doesn't matter maximalist, but I think that the point of speculative fiction is that, like, you are trying to say something about society by proposing, like, what could be. And if you're not proposing anything at all, you're just kind of, like, recording what you think to be true, then I don't think you're making the same kind of artistic statement. And also, like, in addition, you wouldn't be part of the literary community that is producing speculative fiction, which I also think is sort of important.
What about like conspiracy theorists where they know it's like not the accepted truth, but also maybe they believe it, but it's less 100%.
I think that maybe if you were to like just speak on what you believe to be true about a conspiracy theory, then it like wouldn't be true. I don't really have a coherent take on this. I would just kind of say that it's not.
I don't think it's really a coherent question either. So, game recognizes game.
Did you ever? I want to ask you this, Ari, because we had the same. I believe you were in this class. So we were in this high school English class, and we had a substitute teacher who had this like indigenous name, and she really tried to sell us hard on this conspiracy theory about this book called The Third Eye, which is basically this book written by some black woman and self-published. It was supposed to contain the plots of the Matrix movies and the Terminator movies. And once the Matrix and the Terminator movies came out, she like went to court with them and sued them for like $1 billion. I was so curious because it was such an off the walls thing to say, like just in a normal English class. I guess it's a pretty well documented Snopes theory where she claimed damages for not only the Matrix movies, also the Terminator movies in like this 150-page book. And it's like generally believed that it was just this massive publicity stunt for her book, which was not really selling, but now it's sold a lot to people who are just like, yeah, the Matrix is stolen intellectual property. Do you remember that at all? Like, is this just something?
No, I remember this. I don't remember. You have a really good memory. I don't remember the teacher at all. I don't remember the teacher, and I don't remember like the class or the classroom or what grade, but I do remember going to a class with a substitute teacher, and they were like, guys, you know, the Matrix is like not like they didn't write that. And I was like, I don't think this is what we're in class to find out about, but keep going.
I think a lot of times substitute teachers just kind of have like a thing and they like want to say that thing. Every time they come to a class, there's like a 50% chance they're gonna like sneak the bit in somehow. There was like the Teletubbies substitute. I don't know if you remember him, like Mr. O had some like takes about Teletubbies that would make it into his class like 50% of the time.
A platform is a platform.
I know. Like, I feel like a lot of substitute teachers genuinely kind of try to use the class as like a platform, just like first like a little bit, just get a little taste of like having access to impressionable young minds. But yeah, I even remember this one time we were reading like this news magazine, and like the substitute teacher was just trying to like go to bat for George W. Bush in a way that like had some plausible deniability, and I was kind of just like. I was only like in elementary school at the time. I was like a freaking fourth grader and reading like Scholastic News, but I'm like, something kind of feels like not right about this. It's hard for me to put my finger on it.
I feel like substitute teachers definitely are just like as a group avoiding cooking the proper amount. Like they're either just like sitting there like doing nothing, interacting with like nobody, like maybe doing attendance and then just sitting in the corner, or they're just like going hard for like no reason and just like, start giving you a rant about like whatever for like 10 minutes and you're not even doing shit in the class. Like occasionally one will have sort of just like a normal teacher kind of vibe where they'll like, talk some and whatnot, but also like actually teach. But I feel like that's pretty rare.
I'm glad Ari is here because like he can validate all of these like insane substitute teacher experience that I've had where you were like also there. I'm realizing now like going on. I feel like for my most insane substitute teacher experience, you were also there. Like, do you remember this one substitute teacher where it was just like totally silent, and then they just like went over to the emergency button and just like started like spamming it. Like they just like pressed the emergency button like 10 times. And then like the person got on the intercom and they're just like, what is the emergency? And she's just like, my class is being too loud. And then like the person is visibly just like, okay. Do you want us to send someone down from the office to like check it out? She's like, yeah, that'd be great. And just like, okay. And then there's just like this guy who pulls up like 2 minutes later who just looks like so done. He just comes in and he like addresses the class. He's like, your teacher has informed us that you guys were being too loud. And then someone just immediately is like, we're doing a group project. And then he's kind of just like, oh, okay, well, how about you just make sure you guys listen to your teacher, all right? And then he kind of just like, and then like the whole time the substitute teacher's kind of just like, yeah, like get him, tell them what's up, and like then he just like shuffles his way out, and then everyone's kind of just like, well, that was weird.
Oh my God. I had no recollection of that until you said the group project thing. And now it's like, no, that really was happening because everybody had to do their work in like little groups or whatever. And obviously they're talking and the teacher was not having it. Oh my God.
I mean, the craziest part to me was how quickly it went from like not really doing, like she was kind of in like, not cooking substitute teacher mode, just like sitting there with the attendants, and then just immediately goes to like going up to the emergency button, just like spamming that shit. Didn't even like wait after the first press, just was like, it was just like,
I
like,
don't
"Is this real?"
remember that, but I believe that it happened. That's so crazy.
I wonder where substitute teachers hang out, like outside of substitute teaching. I feel like I very rarely got the vibe that they were seriously committed to the path of becoming an actual teacher. When substitute teachers tried to cook, usually it was not cooking in the direction of being like a good instructor. I had maybe like 2 teachers like that, but I feel like they would usually cook in some completely orthogonal direction. Relating to substitute teachers, I feel like in high school biology, we saw some interesting movies. Like, do you remember, Ari? We saw they showed like Osmosis Jones a few times.
I was gonna say all I remember from that is
Yeah.
Osmosis Jones like over and over.
Same.
But then they also showed Gattaca. So Gattaca is this movie about a society where basically everyone opts to have designer babies, which are babies that are genetically modified to be enhanced, like more physical strength, more endurance, more intelligent. But the main character is notably not enhanced because I forget exactly what the backstory is, but I think it might be that his parents either had him outside of officially state-sanctioned channels or they just like didn't have enough money. He has a brother who is enhanced. And there's this whole storyline about how he has a weak heart because he isn't genetically enhanced in some way. And so this will just kind of put a ceiling on how much he can advance. The film itself is actually pretty romantic, or like comes to a pretty romantic conclusion, which is that the main character is actually able to overcome his physical disadvantages and just like beat this other guy despite him having like a weak cardiovascular system because he's kind of just been like forged in the fires of adversity. But honestly, I thought the conclusion was kind of like, just like I feel like it's just not really realistic. Like if you're genetically engineered to be stronger, faster, that's probably not going to happen to you 95 times out of 100. But it does raise some interesting questions about the ethics of polygenic embryo selection and what the moral implications are of basically creating a societal overclass. So I was wondering, what are your guys' takes on polygenic embryo selection or genetic engineering of children? Do you think it's fair and reasonable as long as it's done responsibly without much obvious negative consequence to the people being modified?
I think one thing Gattaca does a good job of with the premise is like saying like, oh, we developed this technology as a medical system so that you can see like if your child has a heart defect or something gonna for them down the road that you can select an embryo doesn't have that same kind of disability, I guess. I think that that was like a very realistic thing that I could see like happening. And then I think the consequence of that being like creating this overclass is also very realistic. So props to Gattaca for that. In terms of what I think about it, this is not a complete thought, but there's something there that feels like very related to the way we talk about like class and race systems right now that are real, where it's like there's a lot of things that you're born with that are not out of your control, that are like, for lack of a better term, like not an even playing field. And I think adding one more dimension to that, it's not that I'm saying it won't change anything, but it's interesting because I think we've seen structures like this before that do exist.
Yeah, I think for it to be effective, which I think could be possible, I think there would need to be like kind of a cultural shift to take place. What feels dystopian about designer babies and whatnot is you're gonna get, everyone kind of like looks the same, acts the same, has the same strengths and whatnot, and are all kind of become identical. And that's sort of a result of like maybe having a culture which has generally the same preferences about things. Maybe, having this designer baby type thing could reinforce that as well. People were like natural or something over time, maybe just have shitty lives and want to have designer children themselves that are like the same as like this kind of archetypical model or something. But I feel like if you had a cultural system in which you just had more like excellence in everything. I don't think it necessarily has to be bad. I think there are some clear benefits in terms of just like shitty genetical conditions that make life more painful and shorter for people being eliminated and stuff.
I would say that I'm tentatively pretty in favor of it for several reasons. I think that the most pressing reason is that I think that if the technology is powerful enough, by trying to restrict it, you're basically just going to make it only accessible to the ultra wealthy. And I think that really what you accomplish by legislating it, unless you just really go hardball, which I don't think is realistic, you would just end up preventing the upper middle class from accessing it. And I think that having it legal generally is just the more egalitarian solution ultimately, even though you will create this overclass. I think that is probably bad. And also diversity is definitely a concern here too. That being said, I don't think diversity will be a concern for quite a while, because I think that for a while it will probably just be you have these embryos that are created from like your DNA and someone else's DNA, and you just like pick the one of those that you like the best. I think it would take a very long time before this actually leads to appearance-wise convergence. You'd probably just get like taller people.
If you don't have any actual like gene editing stuff.
Right. But also, like, I feel like the moral case for not doing it and also to do it for certain diseases and such is very weak. I was talking to my parents about this, actually. They definitely were not on board with the idea, but I mentioned like, oh, well, you know, a lot of the times they used to screen for these debilitating hereditary diseases. And they're kind of like, oh, well, I mean, yeah, that seems pretty okay to me. But like, if it's okay to do embryo selection to prevent someone from getting like Tay-Sachs, why is it not okay to like lessen their chance of having depression? It just feels like to kind of draw this line just feels arbitrary and hard to do, and I just don't really know of a way where you can like separate hereditary diseases from things that really you shouldn't touch. I don't know if there's like a coherent way that you can do that, and maybe this means that I'm just like a little bit too hung up on having like bright lines and ideological consistency, and maybe you just kind of have to have some sort of imperfect division. But I guess just like morally, I don't see that much of a difference. I think that there will be a overclass as a result of this, but that is just kind of going to happen anyway. I would be more concerned with how we cope with it as a society, like having this altered class of people.
Do you guys know those memes that's like $15 to choose your whatever? And,
yeah,
and,
I've
like,
seen those.
It shows all the things. Like some of them are funny, right? I think the question with that too is like, if this technology were distributed in a roughly egalitarian way, people have really different values. I don't think you would run into too much of like, we're gonna have exactly the same babies unless like the only people with the technology are like, we really want someone that's exactly 6 feet tall. Culturally, like, do you want someone tall? Do you want someone wide? I think that would keep up diversity, and what you'd get with the overclass is just like, well, they're gonna live longer and they can like lift more weight and run faster. And to me, that's not the end of the world.
I will say that the one thing that gives me pause about designer babies is that I think culturally it would encourage the ongoing shift towards seeing children more instrumentally. I think that there is this idea, like, if a child is going to make my life worse from like hedonistic perspective, it's like, why should I have a child? I think people increasingly frame children as things to benefit them as opposed to things that are just sort of like inherently good. And I think that if you could kind of like choose features for your baby a la carte, it would sort of...
I'm not opposed to it.
Not opposed to it? You think you would go to bat for it if they were opposed?
I guess it depends. It just like really depends like how good the technology is, like what the cultural attitude towards it is. Very good and reasonably positive cultural attitude towards it. Yeah, I probably would go to bat for it.
I'll say we don't know what the cultural attitude is, but good chance it's bad.
Well, I guess like I'm like a bit of a sheep on this. I guess like I care somewhat about what the cultural attitude is.
Okay. Yeah. What about you, Ari?
I think an interesting space would be like, it's really good technology and the cultural attitude is negative, because I think that would be
that's the most likely outcome.
Question. I could see it, you know, I could definitely see it. I don't think it's something I would go to bat for, unless there was like some reason why you would need that type of competitive advantage, because it's like we've gotten along fine without embryo selection for a while. But I think I would be very curious to see like what is in those screenings, you know? And from a self-centered perspective, I'd just be like, huh, that's like, these are the possibilities. Very interesting.
So you'd like do it and then
And then,
not like just choose random.
I mean, I would be down for that, but I think like once you've seen them, then you kind of have an obligation to choose something that's like good for the child and good for the world. But yeah, curiosity would probably get the better of me.
I actually kind of like the idea of like maybe you have 50 options and you like cut it down to 20, but then you're just like, all right, we'll random out of these top 20. That feels kind of legit to me. I don't know.
That's okay. That feels better for some reason. Yeah. Even
Okay.
though
Like, that feels pretty ethical, I guess.
like it's
Yeah,
well,
I
it's
can't
really
really
funny because
explain
it's
why
like
it's ethical, but
imagine like I think the slippery slope there is really funny because it's like, all right, take out the one with like that's gonna like die immediately. Take out the one with like this condition, the one with that condition, and then once you've done that, it's like, well, take out the ugly one. Okay, take out the short one. Okay, you know.
Well, that's kind of what I mean. Like, I feel like there's just no obvious like way to draw a line in this case. What do you guys think of the things you would screen for in the hypothetical where you did it?
I mean, in terms of physical stuff, like I guess just like normal shit. But I think some things feel icky about it is like if you imagine a lot of people have to make a choice, let's say, between like intelligence and happiness or something in the psychological profile of their hypothetical child, right?
Mhm.
I feel like you could get like a kind of world where it's just like you have an overclass which comes from like not just like the people who were somewhat designed, but like the people who were like designed in a specific way to be like successful at the cost of everything else. I do think that's something scary about the technology.
Yeah, yeah. What about you, Ari?
I would probably just do what the doctor says if I'm being so real. I would find someone who knows more than I do, let them tell me what to do, and then like not do no research, but like I would rather trust someone else on this.
I think more direct gene editing would give me some pause. I would have to think about it more. But I think that I would probably mostly just be screening for neuroticism and depression. I feel like if I could ensure that my kid would not become depressed, I feel like that on its own would sort of justify embryo selection.
I do feel like some amount of randomness could be good for like the mental health of the parent, sort of.
Oh,
where
yeah.
like
That's true. That's
if
true.
you imagine like you're picking between two embryos, maybe one which has a 10% chance of developing severe depression and one which has a 10% chance of having some like really bad physical disease or condition, making that choice feels sort of brutal. And if you do make the choice and your child does become really depressed or something and they maybe hate you for it or something, like that just feels like so rough. Where if you have some amount of randomness in there, it feels like that could kind of mitigate that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, that feels mildly persuasive, I think. I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, that there's like responsibility there. This is okay. I'm only bringing this up because it like sort of connects to what we were talking about earlier, just with like interactive media design. But something that I think is really interesting is like the value of randomness in a competitive activity, basically, which is that like there's kind of a preconceived notion that games like chess or something that's like purely a skill-based game are like a pure form of competition. But there's like a really important function of randomness, which is that like when there's uncertainty in something, there's like the ability to feel hope. And there's always a chance that things could be different because in a purely skill-based thing, or like in the case of polygenetic embryo selection, like if you're able to 100% design and like know what's happening, you kind of know the future in that sense. And like obviously you don't know everything about the future, but you know like the future of this child. If you know exactly what's going to happen, there's not really any kind of motivation for the parent or the child to like try to change something. And so having randomness, whether it's just a probability thing or whether it's like you actually randomly picked from a few different eggs, almost gives you like plausible deniability to be like, well, maybe it'll turn out better even though probably it won't. Like you should still be like trying, you know?
I think that there is a romantic impulse to not want the future to be predetermined. Like, I think that you can believe in fate in a pretty romantic way too, but one of the reasons that I consider myself to have a more romantic disposition is because even if free will were not real, which I believe it to be real, even if that were the case, I would prefer the situation of indeterminism and quantum uncertainty to the situation where you could just predict all events that will transpire in the universe. And I think that there are actually a lot of people who don't believe in free will who would be much more terrified by the first outcome and consider it to be a lot less desirable. Because let's say you're a compatibilist, you sort of define your identity by the fact that there are certain actions that you always would have made. And so you can there is some kind of control that comes with that. Like you are what you do and you always were what you were always going to do. But if it's kind of just like, well, you can't choose anything and also things are sort of like haha random, then that's a little bit harder to take, I think. But for me, the idea of the universe being totally possible to predict in every way is just like way worse. Like I guess I wouldn't want to accept that trade-off. But I was wondering what your take is on this.
My personal take is that that's boring as fuck. If you can predict everything, then like I would just kill myself on the spot probably, and we would all know that that's coming. You know, like,
yeah, you always were going to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one, Kevin. I get that these people exist, and I've talked to them before. But yeah, I just like really don't fucking understand it. Like there's something about every choice you make being what you were always destined to do, and there was like nothing else you could do. That just like feels like you're shrinking, I don't know, your sense of like you're taking like a person, which is like sort of this grand thing, and just sort of shrinking it down into like this minuscule box. It feels just like suffocating, I guess. And it's just like, I don't know, you're not really even a person anymore, which I mean, I get that that's like kind of an extreme take, but yeah, that's sort of my take on free will. But
I don't even think that people would dispute that necessarily, that it makes you not a person anymore. Like I think that such people would often say things like, oh yeah, the person is what you make of it. There's not really any such thing as the self. And we gain identity by conceptualizing ourselves in like this and this and this way. But there isn't really this coherent idea of self-identity. So I don't even know if they would dispute that.
I think that's true, but you can also have that in a world that's like interesting.
Well, yeah, that's true too. Yeah, I wouldn't say that like everyone like that believes that the world can be predetermined.
I think also, in my opinion, one of like the hardest lessons of life is like you can do everything correct, you can make all the right decisions and still have a bad outcome. But the flip side of that is that you can just be like the absolute worst and doing terrible and everything bad. Like everything is going wrong, but it might still be okay. And I think the price of one is like exactly equivalent to the other, and it's worth it for me. I guess similar to what Gordon was saying about like not being suffocated. I think what I'm saying is I just don't want to be responsible for my life like that.
Yeah, it gives you some cope.
yeah,
It gives me major cope.
yeah, I do think there is something kind of just like hopeful and romantic and uplifting about like randomness in general. I remember one time in my junior year of college, I think, I was like working on this experiment where it was like we had some radioactive source or something, right? And we were measuring like photon counts in these like different detectors, right? And there's just like this number that would just like go up into like the tens of thousands, like when recording this over a number of minutes. And I remember I was like, okay, I'm gonna stop this at some point, and if it's odd, I'm gonna like take this path walking home, and if it's even, I'm gonna like take this path walking home, right? And it's just like a purely random event because like the photons being emitted by this isotope are just like truly random in like the truest sense of the word. It's not like any computer program bullshit, right? Walking home that day, I was extremely happy. Like, holy shit, it was such a vibe. And yeah, I don't know if either of you could relate to that sort of feeling, but I do think there's something about just like adding in a little bit of randomness into your life that's kind of satisfying.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm a randomness enjoyer. Like, I think that in a lot of ways, my life is selected for randomness. There's a lot of things that I do just to kind of like see what will occur. I would say that randomness is really the only reason I drink coffee. Whenever I go to a coffee shop, I'm sort of just paying for the chance that some like random shit will happen. And like most of the time, no random shit happens. But sometimes you end up in like an hour and a half conversation about theology with two random old people. It's those times that I'm paying for, you know, it's like an investment. Ari, you have introduced me to a lot of media over the years. In particular, you've introduced me to a lot of shitpost media. How would you describe a shitpost? And what do you think makes a truly great shitpost work?
I think shitposts don't deserve, like, I think they shouldn't have a definition that's rigorous in any way. So
To be
when
clear,
define,
I'm not asking for a definition. Just how would you describe them?
okay, I would say a shitpost is the opposite of sweating. It's the opposite of being a tryhard. You know, it's like any post you make, it's probably supposed to be funny, but it doesn't have to be funny. It's just some garbage, you know? Like, you just throw that shit out there. It can be for whatever, it's probably for yourself, but it can also be like, oomph. You know it's a shitpost when you see it, because it's like, why would you do that? You know?
I feel like there's a sort of like shitposting IQ, sort of. Like, some people don't get shitposting. They'll just see a shitpost. They're just like, what is that? And like, even if you explain to them, they're still kind of just like, what is that? I think this describes basically everyone over the age of like 35. We'll sort of get it, but I think that there's varying levels of how much you kind of like get it. I feel like for me, I can really get like a shitpost from like the consumption perspective. But in terms of like making shitposts, I don't know if the IQ is quite there. Like, I really have doubts that I can like do it. And I think that like even if I did, it would sort of be antithetical to the whole idea of shitposting, because the whole point of shitposting is just supposed to be like spontaneous and intuitive. And if you're kind of just like, how do I like crack the master theory of shitposting, then you're kind of just like already sort of screwed.
I think you're exactly right that like if you're trying to do it, you're trying hard, and if you're being smart about it, you're being too smart. One way to kind of approximate the vibe of a shitpost is like irony and like levels of irony, and I think that's not exactly right. It's like a close way to get there. In a lot of cases, it's like this thing that you made like is not funny, but the funny part about it is that it's in a place where someone could have made a funny thing, and that is funny, like, because of the circumstance. And so that's maybe 2 or 3 levels of irony deep, where it's like we have the cultural knowledge that like this is a place where people sometimes put funny things, and they're funny because those things are funny, but this is not funny. And we know that also because culturally we know the difference between funny and not funny. And so the fact that the not funny thing is in a place where funny things could also potentially be funny. And like that's so stupid. And, you know, and like even describing it like that was so stupid.
One example of sincerity that is hidden inside of the shitpost aesthetic is a great TV series that you introduced to me, Baman Piderman. Do you think you could describe what Baman Piderman is and how you experienced it?
Okay, so Baman Piderman is like a YouTube series. It's mostly shorts. It's Baman Piderman is like Batman and Spider-Man misspelled, so like not without the T in Batman and the S in Spider-Man, and it's like this very like shittily drawn characters, almost line art, but they do have like color and shading, and they move in very silly ways, and they do just like nonsensical things, and there's like other characters in it that make no sense. There's like a tuba, there's what's the other one? There's like a pumpkin.
Pumpkin. Yeah. Who grows legs?
Pumpkin. Who grows legs?
House. Oh yeah.
House. So shit just kind of happens. It's like slice of life if life made no sense and was drawn terribly, and it's very fun to watch, in my opinion.
Would you consider it to be a very sincere show?
I don't know if there's really a message that it is being sincere about, but I think it's unique in an authentic way to a specific time and place on the internet, I guess.
I found Baman Piderman to be a refreshingly sincere show because it was created by Mondo Media, which is the same YouTube channel that created Happy Tree Friends. And if you've ever watched Happy Tree Friends,
that's true.
That shit is fucked up. It is really violent and horrible, and sometimes makes you feel like a bad person for watching it. But Baman Piderman even though there are some things that are superficially similar, I feel like the values of the show are just so sincere and wholesome. Like, to me, the main message of Baman Piderman is just kind of like the value of friendship between very different people, if you can call them people, like the relationship between like Baman and Tuba, and the relationship between like Piderman and Pumpkin, who like grows legs. You just have a lot of moments of initial misunderstanding and then very wholesome reconciliation that you just wouldn't expect in such a shitty format. There's this one scene where they're in this weird netherworld below their house, and there's like a tree, and they're talking in front of the tree. And then Piderman puts the tree and he's like, Baman, the tree is hatching, because trees hatch in this universe, obviously. And when it hatches, there's just like this crazy green tentacle monster that comes out called a squib and just like starts attacking them. Initially, this is just like the main enemy, you know, like there hasn't really been an enemy in the show before, but now it's like obviously Squib. But eventually Squib just kind of becomes accepted as a part of the main cast. There's actually a lot of moments in the middle where people are being very bogus to Squib because, I mean, Squib like tried to kill them and eat them. I mean, it was kind of fair. But eventually there's just like this romance that develops between Squib and Pumpkin. Even watching Baman Piderman, I was like not expecting that. Even though it seems to be like totally random, there's also a weird sort of internal logic to it. There just are these common themes that you can expect to be present across the show, even though there's also just sort of this like weird randomness that's present throughout.
Yeah, I think it's true that the aesthetic of the show is very wholesome, which like not the visual aesthetic, but like the emotional tone of it is very light, and the nonsense is light nonsense. It's not dark nonsense. It's like, look at these silly guys walking around. Look at how they roll down the hill. And it's not like art is dead. Humanity has no meaning. You know, it's just like they're friends and they're holding hands.
The show does have some darkness, though. There's a couple moments that I didn't really catch the first time I watched the show. For example, there's just this recurring theme of Pumpkin having these really traumatic memories of like being a pumpkin with no agency. One of the things that happens in the beginning of the show is there's just this character called Pumpkin who can like sort of move around. It's not exactly clear how, but definitely has like feelings and stuff. And then they end up throwing Pumpkin down into the basement as a sort of like sacrificial lamb to investigate. And Pumpkin ends up getting carved and is just like extremely unwell and is screaming for like 3 episodes in horrible pain. There's a Christmas episode where they acquire a Happy Winter Friends wish, and they use their Happy Winter Friends wish on Pumpkin to make him all better. But instead of being like totally repaired into like the pumpkin that he was before, he just like grows a torso and like arms and legs. And you're just like, what the fuck? It's pretty clear throughout the show that Pumpkin, this like anthropomorphic Pumpkin, has like extremely traumatic memories of being not anthropomorphic Pumpkin that just like resurface sometimes. And there's just like a couple episodes that will begin POV Pumpkin, and there's just like some really dark environment that they don't really explain. Then Pumpkin just like jolts up in bed. There's this other part where Batman is like playing a game, Pumpkin Story or something, and it's just like plugged into Pumpkin's brain, playing past traumatic experiences, and Pumpkin's trying to like cover the screens like, no, don't play that. You know, so having said all that, I do think that Baman Piderman has very wholesome moments. And I think that there's also some really dark things that are portrayed in a wholesome way, which maybe makes them darker in some sense. But there's this one scene where it's like snowing, and you think it's just going to snow normally. It starts out and you're like in the sky and you see this big snowflake and you're like, we must be really zoomed in. But then no, you realize that snowflakes in this universe are actually just fucking 10 feet tall, and they just like crash to earth and actually fucking break things.
It's so beautiful. And stuff like that too, where it's like a little subversion of expectation. I love when it's something like that where you're like, clearly somebody was smart in the way they thought about this and had like cool ideas, and they chose to apply it in this very shitty way. And that is the most beautiful kind of art to me.
Yeah, I think it really scratches a certain itch in my brain when something is like clearly absurd, but like very consistent. The concept does not justify the internal consistency. Something about that really sparks joy for me. A show that reminds me a lot of Baman Piderman is actually the Tumblr famous podcast Welcome to Night Vale. I think that Welcome to Night Vale also has a setting and environment that's very absurd, but like when you first watch it, just seems totally random, but like as it continues, you're like, oh wow, there actually is this internal logic to there being angel alarms that go off whenever someone acknowledges the existence of angels, or like the fact that there's this dog park where there's no dogs allowed. They start off as these shitposty declarations, and you're just kind of like, oh whatever, but then you're just like, oh wow, they were actually really just cooking from the beginning. One thing that's interesting about Baman Piderman is I actually think the first 1 or 2 episodes were pretty clearly not part of this framework. I actually consider the first Baman Piderman episode in particular to be like not canon, because there are just like certain things that aren't really consistent with the universe of the show. And after having watched it a couple times, starts to stand out with you. You're just like, oh, that wouldn't actually happen in the universe of Baman Piderman that I know after having watched the show. But I think with Welcome to Night Vale, they did a pretty good job of planning almost all of it out for the beginning, at least the first 2 seasons. Ari, you have won some music awards. Do you have any takes on awards generally? And what do you think their purpose is in a world where we increasingly don't need awards as much to tell us what is good?
Okay, I think awards are bullshit, but also everything is bullshit, and sometimes you need bullshit to get bullshit. So, what I mean by that, I think with any kind of career advancement thing, it's like there's no one award or like session you can do or like person you can know that's going to make your career. It's like about stacking up as many of those as possible, and then like somehow like it just happens. Awards are a good way to say like, this group of people thought that what I did is valid, and like you may agree with them or you might not agree with them, but like they liked it one time. I don't have a lot of positive things to say, but it does open doors sometimes.
Do you think having competition for an award in art can, like, I guess, reduce creativity or quality in art?
The interesting thing about an award as opposed to critical reception is the amount of judges. So most awards for art things, there'll probably be a panel that decides whether they think what you do should be critically acclaimed or not. Whereas if you are actually releasing stuff into the wild, first of all, there's no set amount of judges. Like nobody could see it unless you do proper marketing work. But second, like if people do see it, then you're probably going to have way more people who have an opinion about what you do compared to an award thing. And so like I think it can be hard to try to make a correlation between like whether 5 people in an in-group think what you do is good versus like 500 people who are totally random think what you do is good. For something really big like a Grammy, like that's in the public eye. People, a lot of times you can be like, oh, I think this is good, it won a Grammy, even if it's not good. Or like even if you wouldn't think that otherwise. But for like smaller awards or things that are very field specific or niche, it's like, okay, like what is that thing that you just said? And at that point it's on you to just be like, well, I have cool art.
What do you think about the idea of awards? Like awards for the best awards?
Can you tell me more about why you would do that?
Well, maybe you as a observer of awards are like maybe you're like some rich person that wants to be like a great patron of the arts, but like your taste is kind of bad, and you're just going to kind of defer to like what awards people say. But you also have doubts that awards people like share your values, and so you commission this awards show to basically award awards for being good awards, and then decide to like defer to some awards programs on that basis.
So it's the kind of thing where like you have awards, and then like if you agree with them, you grant the award committee your own personal award for saying your taste aligns with mine.
Not exactly. I think we can look back at the Oscars, for example, and say that, for example, like not picking It's a Wonderful Life to win Best Picture was kind of dumb, because the film that actually won was like kind of trendy at the time, but it basically had no lasting cultural relevance. Like I don't even remember what it's called, and I looked this up. Whereas It's a Wonderful Life was also up, and it ended up being extremely culturally relevant, like one of the most famous films of all time. And I feel like it would be fair to say that like an awards show kind of deserved recognition for like picking that over the Oscars. Like in many senses, that was like a better decision. I don't really think that you can give awards like in the moment. Like I think giving the awards for like Grammys 2024 is absurd, because like it's that point, it's kind of just like, do you agree, right? But I think that in terms of like longer time scales, like like maybe like 5 years after the fact, you can give an award for like the best awards from like 2005 to like 2015. You're like, from 2005 to 2015, like the SAG Awards really cooked. Like good job, SAG Awards. But maybe like the runway is just too long for that to have any real impact, because you can't really judge in my opinion, it's hard to judge the merit of awards like as they happen, because to me, one of the main points of awards is to be this like critical eye that knows what is going to continue to last. Because if that's not the point, then you can just defer to audience awards or popularity or sales or other things that are much easier to measure. I guess I'm also curious how you feel about popular awards. Like, do you think they are valuable in any way?
I think it's cool to know what other people are thinking. I think a lot of times I feel that I understand what the general population is like, and I'm usually like way wrong. And so popular awards can kind of like have that effect, even though like it's infuriating to be like, you guys are all fucking wrong. That art is trash, and the one that I like is the best one. But it's interesting to see like, okay, that's not how everybody thinks.
If you had to give one awards award, what would it be?
One awards award. Oh, okay. I forget the name. There's this award they give worst opening line of a book.
Oh
And
yeah,
some of them are amazing.
That's the Bulwer-Lytton
Yeah,
award, right?
Yeah, the Bulwer-Lytton, and that would be my awards award. If I have to pick a specific year, I don't know, but just as a general thing, Bulwer-Lytton gets my everything.
All right. What about you, Gordon?
You mentioning that kind of remind me of like the Ig Nobel Prize. Or I think they have one for each of the Nobel Prize fields, but they're all for like kind of the most ridiculous, like legitimate scientific study done in that field. I think in terms of like award that I actually use, I think the Oscars are like pretty good. If you want to go back and find the movies which are like a good combination of quality and culturally relevant, it's like a pretty good thing to do. I also think like to some extent one of the goals of the Oscars and the Grammys and whatnot and like those big awards is to sort of like decide, okay, like I'm gonna pick this piece of media to be what is going to be preserved from this year into the future. They have a good amount of impact on that. Like I think, you know, for like a 19 film that came out in 1990 or something, like it winning Best Picture or not is really going to have a strong effect on like whether people watch it today. And I think it does so for me. And it doesn't really, I'm not really affected by any other form of award outside of watching movies.
When it comes to speculative fiction, one of my frustrations is that there aren't more undemocratic awards. Like the main awards for sci-fi and fantasy are very, very democratic. I think the Hugo Awards, it's literally just everyone who goes to this one science fiction and fantasy convention or is otherwise a member of the society, and you can cast your ballot no matter if you're an actually acclaimed author or just like some random guy that like popped in. The Nebula Awards, even though it's more restricted, it's still sort of more like the SAG Awards, I would say, where it's kind of just all authors that are fitting this criteria. It's not like a small panel that can really meaningfully discuss in the same way, because even for like the Grammys, I think how it works is that you do have this large panel that's voting, but the actual selection is done by more insular committees, especially for the smaller categories. But I don't really get the sense that that's the case for sci-fi fantasy. And I think it would be cool to see a set of awards that are just more taste-based, because when I see Hugo or Nebula Award winners, I'm kind of just like, oh yeah, that was just kind of what was trendy at the time, because that's what it would have to be. Like, they're so democratic. But it would be cool to see when awards, I kind of know that I align with them, or at least I know the certain vibe of what they give awards to. I think that would be more useful to me as a reader. And I think in general, especially for short fiction, it is very hard to sift through sci-fi and fantasy short stories. There are so many of them, so many. And it is very difficult to ensure quality. I'm not trying to rag on anyone's work, but if you just read through all of the Hugo Award winners, they're not all bangers. I can't ensure that something is good or even like a certain way by knowing that it has won Hugo Award for Best Short Story. And I think that if there was at least some sort of award where I could ensure some quality about it, that would be really helpful to me. For me, the most important thing about an award is that it just raises the salience of something that it wouldn't really have otherwise. Like, I kind of don't really care so much about popular awards because I feel like those things would just bubble up to the surface anyway. But it's something that like wouldn't otherwise get attention. I think that's like very awesome. You know, like I thought it was like super cool when The Artist won Best Picture, for example, because it's a film that like probably barely anyone would have watched. But like now that it was on Best Picture, it's just like, you know, all these people see it that otherwise wouldn't have, and hopefully enjoyed it. For me personally, I have a pretty not interesting opinion on this, but I think the Pitchfork Best New Music Awards are pretty good. I don't enjoy all of them, but I feel like there is a certain vibe that they are going for this award, and I appreciate what they're trying to do, and I appreciate that they take so much flack for this. Do you think there is such thing as objectively good art in any sense?
No.
Do you think there is such thing as objectively good art in any sense within the context of a certain culture?
I think yeah, but also like culture is a subjective thing, so like yeah.
Well, I mean, like if you have a certain defined culture, are you saying that like tautologically, like a culture comes with definitions of good and bad art? Uh-huh. Okay.
Pretty much. What I'm saying is I think you can always check if something has qualities that align with a certain perspective, and that's probably the closest you can get to an objective measurement.
Do you think there is such thing as objectively good taste? Maybe a better way of saying that is, do you think you can intentionally improve your taste objectively in a meaningful way? Or are you just sort of like always reorienting it to fit a certain perspective? And like you can't really.
The second thing.
The second thing. Uh-huh. Do you think that people have this base taste that you move towards throughout your life? Or do you think this is just like kind of overstated? Like, do you think you kind of have this inner voice that you must get in touch with? And like, is that even important?
The closest thing I can think of to that is I think people do have physical, biological reactions to certain forms of art. Like, there's a reason why in some music or in like movie sound design or something, like you have really low subwoofers or something that like shake you. That is a physical feeling. And I think like it's not going to be universally experienced, but like I think an easy way to describe it is like, I think it's not a difficult challenge to design something that is a scary experience because fear is like a biologically programmed emotion. If I said, for example, like my art is that I'm going to take this hatchet and I'm going to cut your hand off, I think that I will get a pretty similar baseline reaction from a lot of people.
There's this story about the curation of taste by short story author Ken Liu called Real Artists. And basically, the idea is that all movies are procedurally generated. They just figure out the optimal way to have like the best characters and like the best dialogue and the best climax. But the main character of the story is just kind of disillusioned with the constraints of the reality. They gradually become attuned to the parts of the movies that just feel engineered or mechanical or not quite right. It seems like the sort of story that would have a kind of soulless ending, but the conclusion of the story is that she actually gets invited to become part of the panel who validates whether these procedurally generated movies are good. And there are these people that are selected for having especially refined taste when it comes to evaluating movies. These are the people that are used to validate the process of the AI as it goes through this process of generating movies. The take on it is sort of heartwarming because they're just like, hey, it's not all bad that we're procedurally generating these movies because there is a human in the loop. And also, this entire thing is just the synthesis of like everyone's taste ever generally. And like, is that really such a bad thing? So I was wondering, do you think that's heartwarming? Do you think that a situation where movies are mass produced and then validated by like a live audience with really good taste is like a great utopian situation? Or does something feel kind of dystopian and mechanical and unromantic about it? Or both?
To me, I think what we're missing, and this is maybe more about the AI than is really important, is the fact that like somebody designs this black box that synthesizes everyone's taste. And like, let's say my argument is like there's probably no way to make that truly neutral, but for the sake of the question, like let's say that this program is exactly representative of the entire population that it's that forms the database. I don't know. I think it limits the range of expression a lot because I think you don't want to live in a world where everybody enjoys everything. I think it's a lot more interesting to have things that some people really fuck with and some people are like, I know that's not for me. And I think you can get more satisfaction out of something like really fulfilling your weird niche desires that other people maybe don't have. So it's not that I'm saying that like it's a bad system. I think it's just like a limited system.
there's an amount of cultural space that just like even talking about media takes up that would have to like be shifted to something else. Like, I mean, in the world of that story, this podcast definitely wouldn't exist, for example. I feel like a surprising amount of conversations can sort of boil down to like, this thing good. No, this thing bad. But it's good because this. No, but bad because this, and like vice versa. And it's like, I don't know, pretty enjoyable. And I feel like you're kind of losing something significant there if just like all media experiences are good.
Well, I think this is a pretty good time to wrap things up. As a final note, Ari, do you have any short fiction recommendations that you would like to make, or anything else that you would like to plug?
I know this really cool kind of VR immersive game, and like it's short for a game. It's not like terribly short as an experience, and it's also like part of the twist is that it is fiction, but that's fine. It's called Before Your Eyes, and it's basically this story that lets you kind of choose between the type of life you have, using this mechanic of like when you blink. So when you like blink, it switches your memory to a different memory. And it's just a really interesting way of storytelling, and the story is really compelling.
Thanks so much for coming on the pod, Ari, and we will see you all next week.